Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, exposing fraud in healthcare. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, blood money is the story of how a Silicon Valley CEO became a fraud fighter. It is an insider's look at the David versus Goliath struggle between a whistleblower seeking to save his company and stop taxpayers from being ripped off, and healthcare companies engaged in massive fraud. Affecting millions of taxpayers, it is one of the biggest hidden stories in the healthcare world until now. On Prudent Money today, we have the man behind Blood Money, Chris Riedel, and the author of the book named the same. Chris, welcome to Prudent Money.
Thank you, Bob. It's nice to be here.
You know, congratulations on the book. I think I saw that you were number 8 on the ebook rankings for Amazon.com. I got to say that this is what makes the book unique. It's a thriller. It's a real, live, true story, and also an eye-opening education on fraud, all rolled up into one. So congratulations on your success in your book and the good work that you're doing.
Thank you. It's really quite an amazing story. There's more twists and turns, and our readers are going to be, they're just not going to believe a lot of the things that I went through and the stories that I had to live through.
So let's take you back into the laboratory. You go back into the laboratory industry after retirement, 11 years after you retire. Tell us what you uncovered.
What I found was that two large companies, they were actually much larger than any other companies in the industry. They were nicknamed by Wall Street analysts as the Blood Brothers. And these are companies we've all had laboratory tests from, Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation of America. And what I found was that they were selling tests often below cost for the single purpose of hooking doctors to use them so that they could pull through far more profitable Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance business. Doctors don't like to use more than one lab. It's just complicated. So if you can hook them for a small percentage of their business that's billed directly to them, then you can bring through the highly profitable business. And, I was forced after 2 years to make a decision. Was I going to try and copy this? And I thought it might be illegal.
Sure.
So I called our regulatory counsel and said, hey, if I do this, am I going to have some legal exposure? And he goes, oh, yeah. First of all, those are considered kickbacks by both federal and state statutes. And secondly, the Medicaid program in California is entitled to the lowest charge that companies charge anybody else. And these were not being passed on to Medi-Cal. They were often charged 20 to 40 times more than their lowest charges. So I had a choice. Was I knowingly going to violate federal law? Was I going to close the business and lay off 150 employees and write off most of our net worth, or try and stop the practice? And the only way to stop the practice, I found out, was through a whistleblower lawsuit.
So, Chris, the stories you write in the book feel more like you were dealing with the mafia rather than corrupt corporate America. Just the fact, like you were saying, that the smaller labs had a choice, either commit fraud or get run out of business, is a mafia story all in itself.
Well, in fact, I heard a assistant U.S. attorney talk at a Taxpayer Against Fraud conference a couple of years ago and described Merck, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, as a as a mobster, as a mafia organization masquerading as a pharmaceutical company. And, I found a lot of that in my fraud fighting career. You're too big to fail and too big to jail.
Not a good combination. Well, in the book, you wrote about how they were actually hiding money in the Cayman Islands and burying gold. And, talk about that.
Yeah, there was one company in particular that it took off like a rocket ship. It went from a startup company to $400 million of revenue in 4 years. And they were doing that by offering huge kickbacks to doctors and never billing patients, which insurance companies, that's insurance fraud. And so when the government moved in on them after years of investigating our lawsuit, the owners of the company did everything they could do to hide assets. They went down to the Cayman Islands, unexplained to anybody. One of the government investigators told me that they had heard that one of the CEOs had buried a shipping container full of gold in his backyard. And then they did things like sell their houses to their parents for $5 and other real estate properties. They were trying to make themselves judgment-proof.
Well, no good story of fraud goes without politicians being involved. So talk about the role they played in the story.
Well, there was one in particular that is just disgusting. In Florida, they had the same law as California, where they were entitled to the lowest charge. And so after we won our historic $300 million in settlements in California, we moved to Florida. And the Attorney General had her whistleblower office, the whole office, work 2 straight years on this. They thought it was a, quote, slam dunk. And so first, LabCorp, a LabCorp lobbyist approached a 24-year-old freshman legislator and convinced him to submit a bill to the legislature where it would it would replace lowest charge or just get rid of it, and it would make it retroactive so that LabCorp and Quest would have no liability. Interestingly, Attorney General Pam Bondi was so upset with this that for the hearing, she hid out in the woman's bathroom so nobody would know she's there. And when the hearing started, she walks into the hearing room and, there's all these gasps, and the chairman says, "Oh, just a minute, the Attorney General has joined us, and we've never seen her in one of our hearings," and asked if she'd like to speak. And she said, "Oh, yes." She said, "This is just an end around our litigation. It's worth hundreds of millions of dollars to Florida taxpayers. It's unethical. I've never seen anything like it. And this issue deserves to be resolved in the courts, not the legislature." Undeterred, and so they tabled the motion. Undeterred, then the LabCorp lobbyist went directly to Governor Rick Scott. And Rick Scott issued an order to the Department of Health Services in Florida telling them to ignore the law and testify they didn't know about it and it had never been applied in Florida. And that's how they got out of it. Just despicable. Why would you do that to your taxpayers?
Well, what about the book is going to cause a reader to be surprised by something that they never knew was going on in this country?
I think the massive amount of healthcare fraud. The FBI estimates that 1 out of $4 healthcare dollars is lost to fraud. Now, think if you could reduce your healthcare expenditures and insurance premiums by 25%. How much would that help your family? And if the Department of Justice just got serious about stopping healthcare fraud, we could do that. The other thing they're going to learn is that the Department of Justice is not serious about stopping healthcare fraud. They're more interested in, quote, affordable civil settlements than putting fraudsters in jail.
Yeah, that makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. So tell me, at what point did you come to the conclusion that I'm going to have to expose this? I mean, you talked about lose your company or, fight it. What was going on in your mind at this time?
It was a very difficult decision. And there's just something about me that just, I recoiled at this outright fraud that was destroying the industry, driving companies out of business, and flat out stealing money from taxpayers. But it took me 4 months to convince my wife to go ahead with this lawsuit. Whistleblowers tend to be destroyed. Many of them end up, when the defendants find out who filed the lawsuit, blackballed, unemployed, bankrupt, and divorced. It's really awful what happens to many whistleblowers. Finally, after 4 months, I wore my wife down, and she looked at me and she said, "Chris, if means this much to you, go ahead. But if it ever comes back to harm our children, I will never forgive you. And I don't want to hear a word about it. It's like, oh my God. So for 4 years, we couldn't even talk about it.
Mm. Well, you were up against some very powerful people. I mean, talk about some of the fear that you faced, I mean, even maybe on your life.
Well, whistleblowers, I know of one whistleblower where a large pharmaceutical company deliberately ran her off a cliff in Puerto Rico where the plant was, and she almost died. That's the worst I've heard of. Another one came home with his young family one day and found their dog nailed to their front door and written in the dog's blood, "Stop." Wow. So we hired an ex-Secret Service agent to give us some guidance on, how to protect ourselves. And it was very valuable, but yet very common sense information. So, we were on the lookout all the time. And fortunately for us, when we were attacked, we weren't attacked physically, but Quest and LabCorp did get our company taken out of a large insurance company by offering them a huge inducement. And that was like a dagger to the heart of the company. From there on out, it was just bleeding to death.
So the fight that you're taking on is, of course, about the millions of dollars stolen from the taxpayer, but it's also about life-saving quality medical lab testing. Talk about that aspect of the fight.
Yeah. These large public labs are far more interested, in my opinion, in cutting a quarter of a cent from their profits, or increasing their profits by a quarter of a cent. And if they can cut a service that will do that, that's not absolutely vital, they'll do it. But in the process, they did some things that are just horrible. Quest Diagnostics, for example, tested for 2 years a parathyroid hormone test that didn't work. And it caused people to have their parathyroid glands removed, to have lifelong drug therapy with very unpleasant circumstances, just horrible things. And I asked myself, how in the world could any company, any laboratory, not realize their test was inaccurate? And it's beyond my ability to comprehend how they didn't know.
Now, you were successful in a highly publicized case in 2011 where you won a landmark $300 million in settlements for the state of California and taxpayers. We talk about the significance of that case.
It was the largest settlement ever in a state whistleblower case, and it changed the playing field and made it easier for laboratories to compete. And it stopped taxpayers from being ripped off. Sure.
Well, in the book, and you just mentioned a second ago, the financial problems that you had, you wrote about how you were weeks away from professional and personal bankruptcy. Talk a little bit more about what led you to that point, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, it was a very difficult time, certainly in my life, and I was almost non-functional. Quest and LabCorp, when they learned that I was the guy in my laboratory, were behind this whistleblower lawsuit. They went to a large insurance company, Blue Shield of California, and they said to them, look, we together get 70 cents of every dollar you spend on outpatient laboratory services. We will voluntarily reduce what you pay us by 10% if you will take Hunter Labs out of network. And it was too good for Blue Shield not to accept. And once you're out of network, it costs patient more money to use your lab. And doctors aren't going to submit their patients to that. So we were just hemorrhaging dollars, and we put all of our life savings into trying to keep the business afloat while the litigation was pending. And when we finally had our second settlement conference where we entered into this settlement, we were literally 2 weeks away from complete bankruptcy of both ourselves and our business, and we would have been homeless.
Mm. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Talking to Chris Riedel about an amazing book, Blood Money. And if you want more information, go to his website. It's a great site, and you can watch some of the trailers and information about the book and the story at www.Riedel, author.com, spelled CHRISRIEDEL, author.com. And it's a great website. Now, we're just, of course, talking about the laboratory industry. You said that, I mean, this has got to be going over healthcare industry wide, and you're just looking at one segment of it. Is what do you see as the future of fraud in healthcare?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing, and it's growing. And I mean, the problem is it pays. You know, in all of my cases, or almost all of my cases, after years of investigation, the Department of Justice is willing to settle for 20 to 30 cents on the dollar. So the fraudsters keep 70 to 80 cents on the dollar. Who's going to stop?
Sure.
No one goes to jail. No one loses their job. No one loses their bonus. Quest Diagnostics has had 10 separate settlement agreements, and yet nobody got fired. I mean, that's why it's going to continue. The lab industry is just one segment, but this is pervasive throughout healthcare. We've recently started to look at the insurance industry, and we're finding the same kinds of things.
Hmm. How deeply involved do you think politics are with all that?
Well, these big companies donate lots of money. And, you know, when you donate money to politicians, they tend to help you when they can. I mean, there's a big fight now in Congress about should the United States be able to negotiate prices for drugs, which are very expensive, to the same discounts that other first world countries receive, France, Britain, Canada, Italy. And there's a big debate about whether we should allow that or not. Well, why not? Why should our taxpayers pay more than French taxpayers for the same drug?
Yeah, it makes no sense. I was talking about this yesterday, that the House and the Senate are on different sides of the insider trading laws. And why wouldn't you vote that it was illegal to do insider trading if you're a politician? That's just
I have no idea.
That's where
I mean, insider trading is illegal and dirty and unethical, and you know, people who do it and get caught should be punished.
Sure.
And oftentimes you do read about people going to jail. I mean, Martha Stewart, you know, is one case.
So talk about being a whistleblower. I mean, I know that a lot of the laws have changed through the years. What types of laws actually protect whistleblowers?
Well, within the statute, you are protected from retaliation. But in my case, for example, this same settlement conference I talked about in California, where it bled us dry, I asked the Assistant Attorney General in charge if he would make a condition of the settlement agreement that Quest and LabCorp go back to Blue Cross and insist that we get put back in network. And he refused to do it. So even though there are legal protections, that doesn't mean you're going to be protected.
If someone was listening and said, "Boy, this sounds like a situation that I'm in," and was thinking about being a whistleblower, what kind of advice would you give them?
There's a chapter in my book about rules for whistleblowers. Absolutely read that. There are things you can do to protect yourself, and you need to do those things. But the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, is the fraud simple enough that a 12-year-old can understand it? Complicated frauds give the Department of Justice difficulty. Unless you can explain it in a sentence or two, it's probably not going to go anywhere.
So talk a little bit about what you're doing today. You're still fighting fraud and making a difference. So talk a little bit about what some of your objectives and goals are.
Well, you know, I have morphed from a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who founded 5 healthcare companies into now a fraud fighter. That's what I spend my free time doing. And, you know, there are many cases that we're still working on, and I get calls all the time from people who say, hey, I've seen this with my company or a competitor company, you know, what do you think? And if after investigation it looks like it is a significant fraud, I'll form a limited partnership with that person, and we'll go ahead and file another lawsuit. And we have quite a few now that are under seal. A seal is where, when you file one, a federal judge or a state judge will, quote, seal it so that nobody can see it. And the purpose is so that the government can investigate it without the defendants knowing exactly what they're investigating.
So, Chris, just out of curiosity, whatever happened to Hunter Labs?
Well, we ended up selling it, thank goodness, and we lost a lot of money, that we had invested in it. But, at least we were able to get something for it.
I know that you're probably not surprised when you do discover fraud and you see these cases, and it's just kind of something you continue to see. Having said that, are there elements of a fraud case that actually surprised you to the point of saying, wow, I didn't see that coming?
Yeah. And that was dealing with the various government agencies. The statute was designed such that it created a private-public partnership between the government attorneys and private individuals in their law firms who have found fraud. And they're supposed to work together, sharing discovery, reviewing the documents. And in the rare cases when that happened, like California, we had great success. But particularly with the federal government, they don't like to do that. So they say, okay, thank you very much. We'll take it from here. And every time they haven't worked with us, things just didn't work out well. But that's the way they like to do business. And I never anticipated that.
Well, Chris, congratulations on your book. Once again, it's called Blood Money. If you want more information, go to chrisriedelauthor.com. And Chris, thank you so much for coming on the program. It was great talking to you.
My pleasure, Bob. Thank you.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. What a great opportunity to bring Chris on the program and talk about a true story, a story he's still living today. And what's just amazing to me is that the story of how political agencies, politicians fit into it. It always comes back to money. And if you think about it from the standpoint of we're all paying high health insurance premiums, and if they could cut out the fraud, they could cut out the high premiums. It's just a shame that this kind of thing is allowed to go on and take place. But congratulations to Chris and his efforts and everything that he's doing. Like I said, this book reads like a novel and a thriller but it's a true story. It's a great combination of elements. And once again, the name of the book is Blood Money by Chris Riedel. Once again, his last name is spelled Riedel, and it will be up on the must-read list at prudentmoney.com as well. So if you need to find any more information about that there at the website. This is Bob Brooks, and you have been listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Listen, if you ever have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Until we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.